We're well into 2019 and spring internship programs across the U.S. are in full swing, even here at BEME.
Every year, over 1 million college students and recent grads enter the intern workforce in hopes of gaining the experience that will eventually guide them towards a job in their desired field. Some internships are paid, but many are unpaid, and these are often unregulated and without employee protections.
What's more, not everyone can afford extracurricular job training with no pay, and that puts these students at a disadvantage when they're later seeking jobs.
So, how can we make access to this experience more fair and more inclusive? In December of 2018, unpaid internships came under renewed criticism when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called out her congressional colleagues for taking on unpaid interns, then promising that she'll pay her interns $15 an hour at least.
You should apply there.
I've actually applied somewhere else, so...
Shortly after AOC's comments, Senator Chuck Schumer's office posted a job listing for an unpaid internship on their team. They later retracted, stating, "This posting was made in error." Carlos Vera, founder of Pear Interns, a group advocating for more paid internships, said that Schumer's office has never paid their interns. I spoke to Schumer's office, and they said they can't say for sure if they have offered them in the past, but they will now be offering stipends going forward.
And hopefully, it won't just be Schumer's office. The House and Senate passed 2 intern pay funds in 2018, granting $8.8 million for the House and $5 million for the Senate for the 2019 year.
Some history here. Internships weren't prevalent in the U.S. until the 1970s. At that time, there was a surge in college enrollment, and graduates were facing a tough job market. Those graduates needed to find experience outside of their degree to give them a competitive edge over other applicants. Enter internships. Now, how did the struggling economy support these workers? Well, employers didn't have to pay them legally. The opportunity to provide job experience in lieu of compensation goes back to a 1940 Supreme Court ruling, Walling v. Portland Terminal Company. In this case, the court ruled that the rail company wouldn't have to pay railway brakemen for the week they spent training. This created a loophole for future employers to take in unpaid trainees.
Now, remember 2008?
Yes?
It was the Great Recession, and that caused an unprecedented rise in unpaid internships as unemployment rates rose and college grads were desperate for any career opportunities. Only 17% of recent college grads had internships in 1992. By 2008, nearly 50% of the same group had one. There's no official stat on how many of those internships were unpaid, but we did find a figure for 2011 from NACE, noting that 49% of internships that year were unpaid. Have you ever had an internship?
No, I never had an internship. I preferred making money.
The rules surrounding unpaid internships have historically been unclear. The Department of Labor under the Obama administration sought to clarify the rules of unpaid internships. And then in 2010, the DOL released a 6-factor test based on the Walling versus Portland Terminal Company Supreme Court ruling. This was intended to be used by employers and courts to evaluate whether an unpaid internship was indeed an internship. And for an employer to be compliant, each one of the 6 factors had to be met. However,
the DOL did not prioritize enforcement of their guidelines. After 2 years, the DOL had cited just 11 companies. Employer compliance was only investigated if an intern complained or sued. But complaints were rarely filed, as most interns feared that doing so would negatively affect their job prospects. I mean, who wants to start their career that way? Not me.
So what currently qualifies as an internship? The experts we spoke to stress that it's still really vague.
That 6-factor test evolved into a primary beneficiary test, a flexible test where no single factor is determinative. That means companies aren't legally obliged to meet all of the criteria, and enforcement in the courts is considered on a case-to-case basis.
Now, in 2019, the job market is a lot stronger, and paid internships are on the rise, but there are still a lot of unpaid positions. NACE reported that 43% of U.S. internships were unpaid in 2017.
And interns are still obligated to be the whistleblowers for unfair practices, which still happen, since not all employers are following the guidelines. One of the key guideline recommendations is number 6. The extent to which the intern's work complements rather than displaces the work of paid employees while providing significant educational benefits to the intern. So you shouldn't be able to just hire a bunch of unpaid interns to do the job of an employee, right?
And yet. In a case in 2018, a private equity firm in Boston was ordered to pay $550,000 in back wages and penalties to former and current employees. Over the course of 2 years, the company had 12 known employees and more than 180 unpaid interns. Many of the interns were working more than 30 hours a week and regularly doing the same tasks as paid employees, for no pay or school credit. This violates Massachusetts Department of Labor standard 6-part test, specifically number 3. The training interns receive through an internship does not displace regular employees. So, going back, why do we, youngsters, need internships?
Internships have continued to be important on a recent graduate's resume. Recent graduates, 6 months out, who have had more than 2 internships are over twice as likely to be employed than those without internship experience.
Internships also help students figure out what they want to do. It's the first chance to get real work experience in a desired field. Someone can work for their dream company, maybe even get a job there, or learn that maybe it's time to switch majors, which happened to me, fortunately. But when that internship is unpaid, they're also joining a system that hasn't been clearly regulated by the government. Again, the primary beneficiary test guidelines are just that, guidelines.
And because an unpaid intern is not an employee, the intern is not protected under the Civil Rights Act, which means if your boss hits on you or you get fired for your disability, you don't have a lot of options to fight back. But fortunately, a bill to protect interns just passed in the House and will be voted on in the Senate.
Did you guys know that Monica Lewinsky was an unpaid intern?
Yeah.
Who's Monica Lewinsky?
Now, what we've said so far applies only to students who can afford to have an unpaid internship. Not everyone can work for free. Internships may require you to pay for transportation and relocation costs like rent, plus other job-related costs like appropriate clothing, blazers.
You can't wear a bodycon dress to the office.
Parents paid my rent in DC, they bought my groceries. They completely 100% supported me. If I wasn't in a position where I had parents who had the means to be able to support me, I couldn't have done that internship.
Matthew Ora, director of the Center for Research on College Workforce Transitions at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, pointed out that many students are already working a paid job because college is expensive, leaving little room for an unpaid gig. In a survey Ora conducted, nearly 2/3 of participants who wanted an internship but didn't have one couldn't because they needed to work their current job. He described the system as reproducing inequality. By not paying interns, companies are potentially losing talent that exists in lower income groups who don't have the support system to allow them to take an unpaid job.
This disproportionately impacts people of color. First-generation college students are more likely to be people of color, according to a PNPI analysis of government data, many of whom are already facing hiring discrimination, according to several studies.
Without policies preventing this, we get intern classes like this.
The Democratic National Convention saw a rise in POC interns in just one cycle after offering paid positions.
And unpaid internships don't all merit the cost that comes with them. In 2011, paid interns spent 44% of their time in professional work and 24% in clerical tasks. For unpaid interns, it was 33% of their time in professional work and 31% on clerical tasks. So as the unpaid intern, you're less likely to be learning the kinds of things you want to be learning and more likely to be stuck doing mundane tasks. A 2017 survey showed that over 60% of paid interns received job offers before graduation. Only 42% of unpaid interns did, which was less than those who didn't have any internship experience.
So what is there to do about it?
Pear Interns, the activist group we mentioned before, actually led the fight to get the bill to pay congressional internships approved. Their distinct goal is to eradicate unpaid internships altogether because of the tendency for unpaid positions to breed inequality.
The problem is that mandating paid internships could lead to less internship positions altogether. For example, in 2014, after Condé Nast agreed to pay $5.8 million after being sued by about 7,500 former interns, they decided to end their internship program altogether. Those opportunities are gone now. We reached out to the publisher for comment. They didn't respond, but we should note that they later started a paid fellowship program.
Any decline in the supply of internships would create a much more competitive job market, a competition in which wealthier students would still hold the advantage. Human rights lawyer Mark Bennett is skeptical of companies that claim they cannot afford to pay their interns. He told us that some companies spend that much on paper in a week.
But still, unpaid internships exist and probably will continue to do so. So how do we make them better?
Start with making education a priority in each internship. Limit the coffee fetching. Another option, create a fund to offset the cost of unpaid internships for college students, like the Emerge program in Chicago, paid for by private entities. Matthew Ora also recommends letting more college classes take on the role of internships with more hands-on learning, giving students the kinds of experiences they would get at a good internship.
On a smaller scale, some have chosen to shame companies. Controversy emerged in January when an unpaid internship was posted to study extreme poverty at NYU Law. The irony. In response to the backlash, NYU said,
all current NYU Law students are eligible for summer public interest funding from NYU Law, including for these internships. Other law school interns usually bring summer funding from their universities or intern for academic credit. For any intern who does not have school funding, we would work with them to secure it.
It's important to call out companies and people who post unpaid positions.
For example, check out the comments on this Brookings article about unpaid internships.
And if you're an intern now, one day, hopefully, you won't be. You may even be in the position to hire an intern. And if you can't pay them, at least make sure they have a good experience.